Testing. 1, 2, 3. Once again on this show, we're right on track. We give you the trivia. We give you the facts. So let me sack the rumors. There's no lack of humor. We take a crack at the first movie that took it back. So chillax, relax, and pour yourself a nice piece of wine or a little bit of snack. You're listening to Back Look Cinema, the podcast. My name is Zoe, that's Z-O, or Z to the O, if you're listening outside of the U.S. This is the 132nd episode. Thanks for downloading and streaming. We really appreciate it. We watch the movies that I loved when I was growing up, the movies of yesteryear, from the late 1900s. If you like what you're about to hear, then tell your family, tell your friends, tell that crazy scientist up the street from where you live about Backlook Cinema, the podcast. Now, what's up, guys? My next guest is a historian of sorts. His field of expertise is that premium time when the best of the best cartoons could only be seen on Saturday mornings. With grit and enthusiasm, he brings you fantastic insights about the cartoons of this bygone era. Ladies, gentlemen, and gender nonconforming, I present to you the final word in the animated arts, Christopher J.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. It's always great to have a kindred spirit on the podcast, going back in time and examining the entertainment of the past. And I listen to your episodes, and I just get filled with the warm and fuzzies of full of nostalgia when you talk about the cartoons that we used to watch, especially on Saturday mornings. It just brings back memories of, because there was only really two times that you could watch. You could watch like on the weekdays, either early in the morning when you get up, or in the afternoon after you get back from school, because programmers knew exactly when you're around. And then only on a couple of channels. Like, you would never see it on the major networks, only on the smaller channels. And then Saturday mornings, where the premium cartoons were.
Yeah, well, back in the day, it was the excuse to get up and roll out of bed early on a Saturday and get a big bowl of cereal and sit down in front of the TV and pull up one of the three channels that you had and just watch something that was, made for your age group, something that was cool, or, like your Muppet Babies or your Smurfs or your Turbo Teens or things like that, So it's been an adventure going back and revisiting these things and looking at them as an adult, and also wanting to feel like a kid myself and putting in the commercials and all that stuff. And I'm always glad when I hear other people tell me that it makes them feel like a kid, or that they're excited for the episodes the night before that they come out, like they were kids again. That's the whole point of this. And that's the magic of nostalgia, I suppose.
It's funny. I just thought of this as you were speaking. The best time for Saturday mornings was when they were announcing like the new slate that were coming out in the fall. So I guess it was like maybe the Saturday before the new cartoons premiered. They would have like a huge show to show you all the cartoons that were coming up. And they would be like, and this, I was just saying, in this season, we've got the Orbots.
Yeah, they would have these preview shows, and they'd have the celebrities of that network, like Larry and Balky on ABC from Perfect Strangers, walking you through what to expect when Saturday morning started. Or early in the 80s, it was like Henry Winkler's The Fonz telling you all about what the network had for you, And yeah, they were very exciting. They made it seem like this is going to be the best season. These are going to be the greatest cartoons on earth. And sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't, sometimes they were one and done and gone. But I find that they're not gone from people's, minds and hearts, and that they come back to them. And I've had lots of people say that I've covered stuff that they thought were just fever dreams that they thought that they had imagined, but it turns out that they're real, like Gilligan's Planet and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of those. Turbo Teen is one of those too, because it's like a human transformer that raises all kinds of questions about where fuel goes and what happens to things when he transforms into a car, and just kind of a horror show if you think about it way too long. So I try not to, but I try to present it as good, clean fun, and try to have a lot of fun with it. And put in all the toy commercials and cereal commercials and try to just remind people of what that time was like. And if you weren't a kid at that time, try to bring it along to younger kids, like my kids or other people's kids now, or possibly grandkids, so that they understand what that time was like, because they don't have that anymore. There is no more Saturday morning. There's Me TV that does a couple things, but for the most part, there's nothing like what it was back then. You're excited to get up and do stuff, and you sat down for like 4 or 5 hours at a shot, and then you went to the mall when you were done.
Right, yeah. Nowadays you can get cartoons anytime. So what do your kids think of some of these cartoons that you watch?
So when I was starting the podcast, I sat down and would watch them on the TV and watch them with my kids, because I wondered the same thing, because they grew up with much different cartoons, usually on whenever they wanted them, or there'd be like a block of them or something, like The Amazing World of Gumball or something like that, where they could just stream one after the other. So when I started this, I explained how it worked, that it was on at a certain time and that there were commercials. My version didn't have commercials, but I would tell them, when we had commercials, that was for the bathroom break, or to go and grab a snack, or if you had chores to do, you try to cram it in those 2 minutes that you had to do it. And we would watch some of these shows. We started off with Thundar and then the Smurfs and some other things. And for the most part, they hung on with it for the first 2 seasons that I did this, and had all kinds of questions about things. Or they say, oh, that's cool, or that's weird, or why was that successful, or whatever the case was. And there were some things that they gravitated towards, like Muppet Babies. My daughter, Avalyn, really liked Muppet Babies. Still likes the Muppets now, but would watch that with me. And the shows that I knew had something, they would come back and say, hey, we watched that one. Do you have more episodes of that? Can we watch more of that? Because that was cool. And it was usually just Muppet Babies that they reacted to like that. But for the most part, they thought it was kind of weird. There were things that they didn't understand as far as like certain references or technology that was presented in there. The old phones and things like that had a much different feel to it, and they weren't quite sure what to do with that. So it was a great time to sort of like explain, well, this is us, this is how this worked. And when I would put the commercial breaks in there as well, I would show them the actual commercials that I was using, so they could get a sense of like the Reese's Pieces commercial that had like a fake ET in it, or the Star Wars toys and how exciting that was at that time, or movie previews, or just whatever. And they kind of got the sense of what that was like. I've often wanted to try to use YouTube to put together like a listing of the shows with commercials, and do it at like an 8 o'clock on a Saturday. So you got that experience of what it was like, live, so that they could enjoy that. But I'm a little too lazy and not tech savvy, so I haven't done that yet, but maybe one day I'll do that and live stream it for people that would care to join it.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a lot of, that would be a lot of work, but the technology is definitely available. The live streaming and stuff that people are doing nowadays would definitely make that easier.
Yeah, for sure. I think I could probably put together a playlist from like YouTube and stream it somewhere.
My next question is that you have a very unique style of speaking on your podcast, though. How did you develop that?
That was through kind of trial and error. So let me take you back to when I was a kid back in the 80s. I kind of had something of a speech impediment, where I would get excited and I would talk to people about things. And then they would look at my mom and say, what did he just say? Because they couldn't really understand what I was saying. So then flash forward years later, where I'm extremely conscious about my voice and think that it's awkward and all of these things. And I pitched to my wife one Saturday morning, I want to do a podcast. Here's what it's about. She said, I don't want to spend money on this. Show me like proof of concept. So I went off and I wrote the first script for Thundar the Barbarian. We had a tax return. I said, here's the script. Can I go off and make my podcast? She said, sure. So I ordered my microphone and the stuff that I needed. I kept it very, very inexpensive to do. I came down to my studio. I hooked everything up. And I lasted for about 3 seconds before I turned everything off and ran upstairs, because I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing with this. Why would a guy who people couldn't understand as a child, why would he try to have a podcast? Like it hit me like what it was I was trying to do. And I spent 3 hours watching YouTube videos for like how to do it. And oddly enough, the best way to get used to using a micro happening is with that first episode, I kind of stumbled my way through it. And then in other ones, I try to improve on what I didn't like from the previous episode, trying to build something that would be better for the long term. And now, because of certain phrases that I write over and over again, it's like assuming a character that speaks like a broadcaster or a manic idiot, depending on which part of the podcast that you're in. So, being able to know that I'm going to start off with things like, okay, here's the story, or in the fall of 1984, blah, 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 blah. It makes it easier to kind of get into that because I already have this, like the door's open. I can force my way in to do the rest of it, and I can do it all in that style. So that's where that came from, is I didn't know what else to do than to try to either be manic or be a broadcaster. And I just put those two things together and Saturday morning podcast.
Oh, it's great. I really like that style. I like that it's basically a way of you working through how you speak, because it's a little bit different on when you're doing the profiles, like you did the profile on Hughes,
right?
And so you are speaking at a little bit more of a conversational tone. I guess because you're more used to it now, you're more practiced, so you're a little bit more relaxed.
That's part of it. The break time episodes as well. Kind of a different feel because that's more off the cuff. I have some information in front of me. I always start off with a memory that usually starts with, so back when I was growing up, and a lot of that sort of slowness is I'm trying to make it feel like it's a natural conversation with somebody that's not in the room with me, but also because it is more conversational. It's not, that one's not scripted at all. It's sort of that one's not scripted at all. It's more of a memory mix with things that I've researched, trying to present it almost as naturally as I can. And I do very little editing on that because I wanted to come out being a little bit more an idiot of the other podcast.
Right. It's very good. So let me ask this final question. What's one of the most bonkers Saturday morning cartoon that you profiled? Like you went over a couple of ones, or maybe ones that you haven't even covered yet, but you went over one that I thought was the most bonkers. But let me hear your answer first.
I was going to say, when it comes to Saturday morning, the idea behind most of the shows is what's going to attract kids, what's going to be entertaining, and is almost a punchline, because when I saw it, I had all these questions about, like, this guy, he's fused with his car because of a government beam that like hits him. And when he gets, when he gets really hot, he turns into his car and he has to cool down to turn back into a human. So it kind of became this weird thing of like, well, if he's the car, do they put gas in it? And if so, how does that work? Like, where would that go? And I had like all these weird questions and just thought it was an insane concept that I wasn't sure how it got greenlit, except that the more creative you can be with something, the better it tends to turn out to be, or the more likely somebody is to get excited about it. And so that's one that I kind of feel is like one of the more bonkers ones. Things like Real Ghostbusters or Muppet Babies or the Alf animated series or things like that felt more grounded in comparison to the guy that was the human transformer. So that's one that really sticks out in my mind. There's been other things, but there were other ones that I'm sure that were just as insane. There was like the show like the Wuzzles that should have gone on further, and there's stuff like that. But I always kind of come back to Turbo Teen as being one of the ones that was just kind of crazy. There it was when I reviewed it, which I could only find a copy of it in German and had to put on a weird translator on it to translate it to English on YouTube. And it gave me some questionable translations in there. So I just kind of ran with it and talked about that in the rundown that I did for it and all that kind of stuff. But that's my answer. Which one did you think was really bonkers?
You hit the nail on the handle. Turbo Teen is the same one. And the reason I think that there was a cartoon about a kid who could transform into a car is because at the same time, Knight Rider was a very popular show. And Knight Rider is a live action show. For those of you who don't know, it's about a guy in a talking car. The car happened to be a Trans Am. And it was a great show. We just loved Michael Knight. We loved the car. The car was named Kit. And I can imagine that a lot of kids ran around pretending to be Kit. I probably ran around pretending to be a car. So whoever produced Turbo Teen probably saw his son running around pretending to be a Trans Am. So what they did was they wrote a show. I think Turbo Teen, he actually transformed into a Camaro. That's what it looks like to me. And so I think that's how that show got greenlit. It's like, kids are going to love this. We're going to have 8 seasons of this show.
Well, the funny thing about the animation back then is that if you look at what was on the schedule, most of the shows that came on were the one season, 13 episodes done. And the next season, the networks would say, well, what else do you have to replace this? Or let's go a different direction. There were a few exceptions to that, like Muppet Baby Smurfs and Real Ghostbusters all lasted. Oh, and Alvin and the Chipmunks lasted for what seemed like forever. So when they needed concepts, I think that you're right. They basically took a first draft idea. They saw something. They thought this will appeal to everybody. This will sell toys in the long run. Let's do this, and we'll have people that'll tune in. If anything, we'll get one season out of it. If we get more, great. If not, then we'll come up with something else next year. And a lot of the concepts that were out at the times that they were out seem to be derived from other things around them. Like you pointed out, Knight Rider with Turbo Teen is exactly right. And then there are movie adaptations like, Ghostbusters and Beetlejuice and things of that nature. But it's funny because if they had an existing property, we talk a lot about reboots now, how, can't Hollywood be original? But they had a lot of shows on in the 80s, especially on Saturday morning, that were dependent on like the nostalgia of the people creating these things. That's how we had like Tarzan and the Lone Ranger and Zorro and stuff like that, because kids that were my age, I don't think that we really knew about those unless we were introduced to them on a Saturday morning show. Yet you knew that the executives and the creatives in charge of this probably grew up with them as radio shows or the TV shows in the 50s and 60s and thought, you know what, kids of today, they'll love this. And so that's why I think that they did that, or they would marry two concepts. I just covered the show, The Biscuits, which is about these tiny little dogs. It's kind of a derivative of the Smurfs meets Robin Hood. And so it's like you marry these two ideas together, some things that are successful, and you hope that these are the two great tastes that'll taste great together to create what, the kids are going to like. And again, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it's even if it's just here for one season and gone, it's still with me 40 years later, and I get to cover it and I get to talk about it. And it's insane, some of the things that I've uncovered on this, and that's been the pleasure of doing my podcast.
Wow, and it's great listening to it. So let's hear your plugs. Where can people find you when they want to learn more about you or learn more about your show?
Well, the podcast, the Saturday Morning Podcast, just look for the blue and pink logo, blue and pink being the colors prominent in the 80s. I'm anywhere you get your podcasts. You can get them from Apple Podcasts or, Google or wherever you would happen to get it. I'm everywhere. If you want to connect with me on social media, I'm on Twitter at satmornpod. My email, satmornpod@hotmail.com as well. If you want to drop a letter and tell me about how your 80s were or your favorite cartoons or something that I might have missed, I always appreciate hearing about that. That's pretty much everywhere I'm at socially.
Awesome. So let us roll into our first segment. Christopher J., why don't you tell the people about the name of the movie and a little bit about the movie that we watched?
Today, we're here to cover Back to the Future. It's a story about Dr. Emmitt Brown, who was truly excited because he finally invented something that worked, a functioning time machine. But during the final test, he and his friend and assistant, 17-year-old Marty McFly, are attacked by terrorists. In the chaos that ensues, Marty jumps into the time machine and accidentally sends himself back to 1955. Stranded in the past, Marty has to find the younger version of Doc Brown. Can Marty convince Dr. Brown of 1955 to help him? Will Marty cause irreparable damage to the time continuum? Is there a way that Marty will ever get back to the future?
This movie was released on July 3rd, 1985, produced by Universal Pictures, Amblin Entertainment, and U Drive Productions. I promise you I can speak. It grossed over $214 million in the US and Canada and $384 million worldwide on a reported budget of $19 million. Now, it's better to adjust this for inflation so we can get a better idea of what it would look like if this movie was released today. So if this movie was released today, then it would have grossed over $613 million. That's just in the US and Canada. That's great. That's like a great box office if you just counted North America. But then it went on to make, or it would go on to make $1.1 billion worldwide. So had this movie been released today, it would have been a Billy. And that's on a $54 million budget. Now, most movies that grossed over $1 billion today, they're at least $200 million or $300 million and they're really aiming to make $1 billion. That's their goal. That's what they're shooting for because they spent $200 million to make the movie. But imagine only having to spend $54 million. The return on that is outstanding. No wonder we got 3 sequels and a cartoon.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. The low cost on that. Some of my favorite movies in the 80s were the ones that weren't the ones that cost the most, but seemed to have the most heart. They put together an incredible movie. This being only 19 million, that's insane. Plus, it also would go on to be the number 1 movie of the year, and it was the champion 4th of July weekend when it came out as well. And you know as well as I do in the years after that and the movies now that's like the prime real estate for like having the big event movies. And this was it for 1985, and still holds up as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, the cost on all this is just insane that it was as inexpensive as it was.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's only one movie that's out like now. I mean, there have been a couple of pop-ups. There's a recent movie that was just released that is not going to do Back to the Future's numbers, but it will be insanely profitable. And that movie is Godzilla Minus One. So the budget is reportedly at $15 million, and it's gone way over. It's like at $100 million gross or more at this point. So spending 50 millions and returning with 100 million is incredible. But what's even more incredible is that the director said that he wishes he had $15 million. So it probably isn't as much as been reported by the media.
Right. Well, that's Hollywood accounting. They'll say one thing and do another, and they hire they're able to hide their profits on even the most profitable movie that everybody can see making money out in public. So it's just the way the studios tend to work, I suppose.
Right. So tell us who's starring in this movie.
Oh, well, the number 1 on the call sheet, I'm sure, is Michael J. Fox, who is known for The Frighteners and would later go on, well, obviously later known for The Frighteners and Mars Attacks and Doc Hollywood. I know just before he did Back to the Future, he had done Teen Wolf and was shooting that when they were shooting with Eric Stoltz as Marty McFly on Back to the Future. And so when Stoltz got fired, obviously they called up Michael J. Fox, who is very receptive to working with Spielberg and Zemeckis and making a movie that looked like something he wanted to do rather than Teen Wolf.
Right. That's funny. I didn't realize that he was shooting Teen Wolf at the same time. And like when I would go through the trivia, it would just say that he wasn't available and that he wouldn't. I forgot what network that Family Ties was on, but he couldn't get released from Family Ties, the TV show.
Right.
So that was also part of the problem. But yeah, Teen Wolf. I think Teen Wolf released the same year, and Teen Wolf is a great movie. I covered that on episode 119. But compared to Back to the Future, it's a completely different way of looking at things.
It really is. Well, the funny thing about Teen Wolf, too, is that they made the movie and they kind of held on to it a little bit to see how Back to the Future would do. And then when Back to the Future exploded the way that it did, that's when they put that Michael J. Fox connection. And it's one of the things that he said he always felt sort of that Teen Wolf was cringeworthy, but it's what got him the Back to the Future gig because he made the connections while he was making it, you know. So I enjoy Teen Wolf. I don't think they'd make a movie that goofy today. There's supposed to be a Teen Wolf movie like from the reboot TV show coming out at some point. But the way that one was done was just like very, very, very 80s, and you know, would probably not be as goofy or as fun as it is now if they were to make it. So yeah, Teen Wolf is probably why what we owe to having Back to the Future actually out there now.
Right. The funny thing about the current Teen Wolf, the new adaptation or remake, is that it's not the same Teen Wolf. It's like the same thing what they did with Riverdale with their Archie comics. It's like super serious, somewhat campy teen drama. And I was like, you know what? I want my Teen Wolf to be funny. So
right.
Up next is Christopher Lloyd. He plays Dr. Emmitt Brown. He's been in The Addams Family, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and Nobody. Have you seen Nobody?
I have not. I saw that on the list. I've seen the others, but I have not seen Nobody. It's one that escaped me for somehow.
It's great. It's although violent.
When did that one come out? Because not being familiar with that, because I'm a huge Christopher Lloyd fan. I feel he can play anything. He's played anything in his career. He does it well. He buries himself in whatever role he's in. So I don't know Nobody, but I was also trying to puzzle out like when it came out. Is it like one of his earlier films? Is it something more recent? What was that?
I think it came out 2 years ago.
Oh, more recent than I would have thought it would have been. All right. It looks like next on our cast list, we have Leah Thompson, who played Lorraine Baines McFly. She was known for Red Dawn, Space Camp, and Howard the Duck, which is funny. Howard the Duck is the movie that she signed on for during Back to the Future in case Back to the Future was going to be a disappointment. She didn't want it to kill her career, so she took Howard the Duck to make sure she had something to go to after production wrapped on Back to the Future.
Yeah, it didn't kill her career, but it definitely didn't help.
I have something of a soft spot for Howard the Duck. I saw Howard the Duck in a first run theater with a friend, and maybe the idea that it wasn't going to be a huge hit was the fact that me and him were there in the middle of the day, and we're the only two in the entire theater. But we sat there, we watched it, we liked it. I didn't know till later that it wasn't even a hit, because as a kid, it's like it was a hit in my mind. And then I heard that it didn't make its money back and like all these things. And people have been like, oh, it's horrible and all this. But you know what? But even Leah Thompson now has kind of come around to it being a cult hit, and, you know, something that she was a part of that maybe it didn't define pop culture. One of those things that only really could have happened in the 80s in the way that story is told, with the campiness and the Howard the Duck, the small person that was in Howard the Duck, and some of it being animatronic, and just the way that they had to achieve you believing Howard was pretty remarkable back then. And I think it's still fun today to look back on and show my kids, so my kids can ask me all the questions that movie deserves to be asked, because there's a lot to unpack in that one.
Absolutely. So up next is Crispin Glover. He played George McFly. He's been in Willard, River's Edge, and Alice in Wonderland. He's basically a chameleon of an actor, and he's a pleasure to see every time he shows up on screen.
Yeah, that's very, very true. I hear he's kind of a little offbeat. He's really had a lot of ideas that he had brought to Back to the Future for the role of George, and the Zemeckis and co-writer Bob Gale were constantly telling him, no, we're not going to go in that way. And they kind of clashed and all that. But I hear Crispin Glover is a pretty unique guy. I've seen a lot of interviews with him over the years talking about Back to the Future. And he seems to have a soft spot for the movie, but it seems to kind of have he says he wasn't really treated all that well on the set and all that kind of stuff, which is a shame. you know, he doesn't really get involved in fandom or anything like that from what I can tell, but he seems like he's a pretty unique actor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bring us up to Thomas F. Wilson, then, who played Biff, Blood In, Blood Out, and Camp No One, other things. Freaks and Geeks, I think he was the gym coach on that, which took place in the 80s as well. And he, don't know much about him personally, but I liked what he did as Biff, and it seemed like whenever they revived Biff for something, he was always there. He was on the Saturday morning cartoon as well. He actually voiced his own character and all the Tannen characters that they threw at him.
Yeah, he has a prolific career as a voice actor, not only in cartoons but in video games too. So he's really out there, and he really embraces the fandom. I think so it's like he seems like a really friendly guy.
He does. He does. Yeah, he seems like he's a 180 from the Biff canon that we all kind of hate in those movies.
Right, right, right. Up next is Claudia Wells. She plays Jennifer Parker. You can probably find her in Still Waters, Burn, and Vitals. Oh, wait a minute, is that it could be Still Waters, Burn, and Vitals.
So I'm not familiar with that one. I only know her as Jennifer Parker.
Yeah, she hasn't been in a whole lot of movies. But and she doesn't have like a gigantic career that I could tell. But she definitely did well as in Back to the Future.
Very true. Very true. She also went on, I think she owns a store in Beverly Hills as well, like selling high end fashions and things like that. And I think she also does come on to do like the Back to the Future conventions and cruises and things like that they do for fandom.
Right.
All right. Well, up next is Mark McClure, who played Dave McFly, Marty's brother. He was in Superman as Jimmy Olsen and Apollo 13 as well, and was a character actor through a lot of the 80s. Played Dave McFly in 2 out of the 3 movies in the trilogy, and was supposed to have shot a cameo for number 2, but had a scheduling conflict, I think, or it was a deleted scene, one or the other.
Right. It's funny, right? Because I feel like every time I see him on screen, it's like I know that guy because he's been in a lot of movies, right? And he
Yeah.
just has that kind of face.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. I think he'll be known forever, if not for Back to the Future, then as Jimmy Olsen in the Superman movies, just because those were such a huge success, and Christopher Reeve really embodied the character. But I think that's probably the thing that'll be on his tombstone, either that or Back to the Future. But yeah, he as a kid, I'd see him in things and be like, "Who's that guy? I know that guy." So he was the it guy in the 80s for a while.
Right. And finally, we have Wendy Jo Sperber. She played Linda McFly, and she's been in Bachelor Party and a movie called 1941 that came out in 1979. I didn't want to get that confused with the 1941 that was just released a couple of years ago.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, 1941, Steven Spielberg movie, written by Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis as well. Wendy Jo Sperber seemed to be kind of a darling of theirs because she was in their movie Used Cars and Back to the Future. And it was in Bosom Buddies with Tom Hanks as well before that.
Oh, that's right. She was in Bosom Buddies. I remember her.
Yeah, she played a certain type too, usually kind of like a bookish, nerdy kind of character. And yeah, she was there. She was funny, and that's probably how she ended up in Bachelor Party and stuff. She was usually a laugh when she showed up on the screen. So I a couple of years ago, I think it was, I learned that in the early 2000s, she had been diagnosed with breast cancer and passed away at a fairly young age. But she's left her mark on a lot of the movies that she was in, and Back to the Future, I think will live on forever. And, maybe people will go back and rediscover some of the other things that she did when they see her on the screen. I'm not sure. 1941 is one of those Spielberg movies that I'm not familiar with. I'm familiar with just about everything else, but 1941 is a weird blind spot in my Spielberg history.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that people normally talk about when they talk about Steven Spielberg movies.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was a weird World War II comedy, so there's a lot to, again, unpack with that one as well. And I think the biggest thing that people remember is that it had John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd in it, and there's this big scene where a Ferris wheel comes off and goes down like a pier towards the end of the pier, and it was this big like set piece for special effects, and they built this huge model. But other than that, I don't think it was a movie that did a lot of business. Robert Zemeckis, Bob Gale wrote it, and at that point, they were probably wondering if their career was going to be in jeopardy because they wrote this movie for Spielberg, and it kind of didn't really go anywhere. It's the movie Spielberg did between Close Encounters and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and there's this weird anomaly that's 1941. You know, it's just kind of its own little thing, I guess. So Back to the Future, directed by Robert Zemeckis. He was the co-writer along with Bob Gale. They'd written a couple of movies together. Zemeckis, as a director, would go on to direct Forrest Gump and Christmas Carol, the movie Flight with Denzel Washington. He's really well known for his other Christmas movie, The Polar Express, which helped to push the boundaries of the motion capture animation for computer CGI and all that. And worked again with Tom Hanks on Castaway, and was at the helm of one of my favorite movies of all time, Contact with Jodie Foster. He also directed, right after Back to the Future, he also directed the hybrid animation movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which also brought him back with Christopher Lloyd in there. And I mean, Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit back to back in the 80s. Like, you couldn't ask for a better director to be at the helm of those, or to have two bigger hits at that time.
Yeah, and Robert Zemeckis is so eclectic. It's like so many different styles, so many different genres of movies that he's directed. Just, it's like he seems to be a man that could do no wrong, or there isn't a challenge that he isn't willing to meet, and then nearly excel at every one of them. He's just I feel like he might be the go-to guy for directors. At least he was back in the latter half of the last century and the beginning of this one.
Right. Well, it's funny. When Back to the Future came out, I don't know how familiar you are with him before Back to the Future, but him and Bob Gale had written a couple of movies, and they weren't hits. They were kind of small little movies, and Spielberg helped to like back those and try to get them in the door for Back to the Future at Universal. And Back to the Future, Universal didn't want to make Back to the Future because they didn't really trust Robert Zemeckis as a director. So then Zemeckis went off and directed Romancing the Stone. And that was a huge hit in 1984. And that's when Spielberg's like, you know what, this time travel movie you have, now is the time to do that because you have some street cred. Let's go and get in the door somewhere and get this thing made. And so without the failures, without the support of Spielberg, and without Romancing the Stone, we don't get to Back to the Future. But then once he hit that point, and again, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the sequels to Back to the Future, he was his own thing at that point. He was like, you know, like a Spielberg for a slightly older generation than the Spielberg generation was. And he's excelled at what he's done. He's been there at the forefront of technology, the motion capture for animation, and just trying to like push the boundaries of how to tell a story. And I've been a huge fan of his ever since I was a kid, and Back to the Future was my entry point into him.
Yeah, what's great about him is that he's especially after Back to the Future, he could pretty much do whatever he wanted. and did.
Yeah, you can kind of write your own ticket when you have the biggest hit of 1985. Yeah.
Right. Along with directing the movie, he also wrote it with Bob Gale, as you mentioned. And so they did work together on a lot of projects. So Zemeckis wrote The Polar Express, A Christmas Carol, Bordello of Blood, The Walk, and Used Cars. And with Gale, he wrote Bordello of Blood. Gale himself wrote Interstate 60. Very small movies, but
right.
that I think that very few people have probably even heard of. But that's really the only credits besides Back to the Future that Gale has. Is like he has the Back to the Future franchise, and he has these two that I've written down, and maybe a couple of small projects. But I feel like he wrote Back to the Future, and he was like, okay, I'm done. I did it.
Well, it's funny too because he's done some of these other movies. I think Interstate 60, if I'm not mistaken, that's the movie that I think he wrote and directed that, and it has cameos from both Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd in it. But Bob Bob Gale has made a career off of answering questions from Back to the Future fans, doing the conventions, and he's either written or been a consultant on like comic book series for Back to the Future as well. And he was really hands-on and involved in the Saturday morning cartoon from the early 90s. He either wrote the episodes or outlined them, and also produced the show as well. So something about Back to the Future is just near and dear to his heart. And it's the thing that he's just like still making a meal out of to this day, but rightfully so, because I mean, he created a whole new kind of like weird genre and was like right there at the zeitgeist of the 80s for this kind of thing. And, you know, if I had that kind of success, I would dine out on that as well.
Absolutely. So tell us who did the score for this one.
The score is by Alan Silvestri, who has over 140 credits to his name. He's had a very, very long career. Most recently, he's worked on some of the Marvel movies like Avengers Endgame. He's worked for a while. He's kind of working exclusively with Robert Zemeckis, kind of in the same way that Spielberg and John Williams had their working relationship for being director and composer. Silvestri also worked on Forrest Gump. And he did work with Spielberg as well. He did Ready Player One, which not a huge fan of the movie, huge fan of the book. But what I liked about the movie is that Silvestri got to go and, you know, actually reorchestrate his themes from Back to the Future for when the DeLorean popped up in that, and be able to score this love letter to like 80s pop culture. And I thought that was an opportunity not a lot of people get a chance to do. But he's worked with some of the greatest people to ever make movies. He was also the composer on The Predator and Van Helsing as well for Universal.
Yeah, 143, so he has plenty of experience, I guess.
He's definitely a journeyman composer that probably has not had any days off in the last 40 years, as far as I can tell. So yeah, he's all over the place. He's pretty renowned. I'm sure, I don't remember offhand, but I'm sure he's probably won some awards for what he's done. But just I can tell you this, every time I put on Back to the Future and that score starts up or towards the end of the movie when the DeLorean is racing towards the courthouse and the lightning is there, and you have the theme from Back to the Future, and the music really brings all those elements together, the visual effects, and Doc trying to slide down from the courthouse and Marty driving that car down the street, and that score is just amazing to make that scene even more epic than it already was. But it's a prime example of how you really can't say that music isn't important to a movie, because the Back to the Future score is I think one of the best. And Silvestri was also a solid composer on just about everything else that he did. I don't know that he has anything as hummable as the Back to the Future theme song, but you know, he's got his foot in the door and he's just made a career out of it. And again, in the last 40 years, I'm not sure he's ever had a day off.
Right. That is the thing that I noticed about Alan Silvestri's scores, is that they're more like mood music and less hummable. Like I think in Back to the Future, it's kind of like he was being inspired by John Williams, maybe. It's more of it's almost a march, so to speak, but in a lot of his other movies, like in Forrest Gump or Avengers Endgame, it's kind of hard to pick out the melody from those movies. But I've come to like, I didn't like the Avengers theme at first, like with the first movie, but as the movies continue to go on, and I was able to pick out the melody, I was like, oh, I think I like this. And then it kind of culminated in Avengers Endgame with the
Right.
there's one particular piece he did, is called Portals, and that's when the heroes are coming out of the portals and they're facing off against Thanos, and then the music behind that is just amazing. So yeah, sometimes it gets a little getting used to, but yeah, he'll meet you there at the end.
There you go. Yeah, really solid guy. And yeah, I do think he's in the same vein as John Williams. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it for the opening credits, and now we're gonna move over to some announcements that I have. That so by the time you hear this episode, the winner of the Felix the Cat contest will have been chosen, and that winner will have had his email read out, and I will have contacted that person, and they will be receiving the shirt. But the thing is that because I'm recording this in the past, I have no idea what's going to happen in the future. And and so what I'm saying now is that what will probably happen, what I'm saying now is probably happened already, is that I'm going to put out a bonus episode, and I'm going to and I'll probably stream it live. You can check me on this and to see if this actually happens. Will I do a live stream and choose the winner to find out who wins the t-shirt live on YouTube or Twitch or something? I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm just spitballing right now. I'm just thinking out loud. But the only thing that you really need to be concerned about is that a winner will be chosen, and then I'll maybe I'll do a giveaway for another 3-month block. I'm looking at the shirts that I have. I'm making up. I made up a new design. I'm making up new designs, and we'll see what people think, and see what would be suitable for a giveaway. So you've heard our guest Christopher J. Let's learn more about the Saturday Morning Podcast.
Okay, so here's the story. The 80s were invaded with Muppet Babies, Smurfs, Real Ghostbusters, Pee Wee Hermans, lots of Scoobies, Wrestlers, Supers, Punky Brewsters, Gary Colemans, Alfs, Archies, and a Turbo Teen or two. You gotta see it to believe it. Here now is the story of how those Saturday morning shows came to be. Where did all those phenomenal cartoons come from? Who were the perfect cast behind some of the most iconic characters ever? Other than pushing toys, cereal, and high C, do they have any other impact? All these questions and more will be answered in every single episode of the Saturday Morning Podcast. Available wherever you get your podcast. Go take a listen, and thanks for tuning in.
Oh, that's an outstanding promo. I need to record a promo.
You know what's funny is that the way that came together. So here's the thing about appearing on your show is that you asked me for a promo, and I'm like, I don't have one, but I got to create one. And I thought, well, the jumping point of my show is always, okay, so here's the story. So why don't I do that for me? And so I just sort of put in a lot of the language that I would use in the podcast in general, talking about the phenomenal shows and stuff like that, or getting together the perfect cast and things like that. So I just sort of threw around some of those and wrote it and then recorded it and cut it together probably about 20 minutes before I sent it to you the other day. So it's actually premiering here on your show for the first time because I've never used it anywhere else. But you forced me to be a better podcast, and I do appreciate that.
Well, since we're on the subject of being a better podcast, do you listen to podcasts that help you be a better podcast?
So the way that I got into podcasting was that a number of years ago, let me kind of back up. Me and my wife, we have 5 kids. 2 of them are adopted, 3 of them are biological, and one of our adopted kids, Dre, when we were fostering him, he has cerebral palsy. He's born with a brain injury. He's in a wheelchair. And so he had different kind of therapies that he would go to on a regular basis. And my wife had a problem one day where she couldn't get out of bed because she had a problem with her back. So she said, I need you to take Dre to therapy. And it turned out that she would basically kind of be stuck in bed for about 3 weeks while we were trying to figure out why her back problem was happening to her. So I would have to take Dre to therapy 4 times a week, which was driving out to his school and picking him up, which took about 45 minutes to an hour, taking him to therapy, which did not involve me at all, and then driving him back to school and then coming back home to get the other kids to bring them home. So I had a lot of time where I was driving and needed something to listen to. And I happened to be going through some podcasts. I'm a big Star Trek fan, and I found a show called Star Trek: The Next Conversation, where I knew of both of the hosts of it is Matt Myra, who, used to be the host of a show called After Trek. It was after Discovery back in the early days of that show. And then the other co-host was Andrew Secunda, who is a writer on the Goldberg. And I've always been a writer nerd. So whenever there's like writing credits on something, I usually paid attention. So when I saw both of them, I knew who both of them were and that they were in the industry, that they were both writers and Star Trek fans. So I'm like, I'll give this a shot. And then I became addicted to that and decided to think, well, if they can do it and they're kind of presenting themselves as being kind of a train wreck, I bet you I could do it. Because even if I'm a train wreck, maybe I'll have listeners was the idea. And so that's one that I listen to. There's another one called the Cherry Bombs podcast. They look at movies like Howard the Duck and Flight of the Navigator and things from the 80s and 90s that didn't really make money, but they kind of tell you why they were good movies despite that. And they kind of advocate for the ones that really inspire me. I listen to them on a regular basis, and I don't listen to my own show ever. I listen to it enough when I edit that by the time I'm done, I can give it to the world and say, this is my best attempt. I'm sorry for anything wrong. I'll take all the credit for the stuff that went right, but then I move on to the next one. So I listen to those two a lot to try to be inspired or have it on in the background or have it on when I do my laundry. But they're always inspiring to me because of the things that they cover and how they're funny and how it just kind of pushes me to know that like I'm kind of a peer to them, and it makes me happy because they have some great shows.
Right. So let's move along. I really want to get to talk about our favorite parts. So in our next segment, we will talk about our top 5 favorite parts from Back to the Future. And that's difficult because you were saying earlier, Christopher, that it's basically a whole movie is the favorite part. And I kind of feel the same way. As I choose these parts, there are going to be I'm going to be missing a lot of parts, right?
for sure. That's natural.
So why don't you start us off from one of your favorite parts?
One of my all-time favorite parts is the moment when Marty gets to Twin Pines Mall, and it's gonna and the whole concept of the movie, but he arrives there, he sees Einstein, and then there's like steam that comes off of Doc's truck, and the ramp comes down, and the DeLorean backs out, and Doc is inside, and there's this crazy wild-eyed scientist there, and he's got this car that you recognize, but you also don't, and just that moment of the car coming out and the camera starting on one side of the car and kind of like working over as Marty is on the backside, like walking around it. It's like DeLorean porn, but it's cool because it's this introduction to these weird modifications on the car, and he opens it up and you can see, I believe in that shot, the flux capacitor, but you don't have any idea what it is. And Doc just looks crazy to begin with. It's Christopher Lloyd. He always played crazy pretty well. But it's our introduction to him. We heard his voice earlier. We kind of heard about him from Principal Strickland at the school. We saw that he was an eccentric in his lab with all the clocks being 25 minutes late and everything else. So or sped up or whatever it was, but and all the clocks that he's got and all the eccentric devices. So we're kind of prepared a little bit for this mad scientist, but the introduction of both Doc and the car together is just perfect. And it when I first saw this, I didn't see it in theaters, by the way. I saw it in a drive-in theater, so I saw it on this big huge screen. But the introduction to that car, every time they did something with it, whether it's inside or it was putting the plutonium rod in the thing in the back, like I wanted to see more of this car. Like I want to know every detail because it felt real. It felt like something that this guy made in his garage. And that moment where it comes out of the truck is just perfect. Although it doesn't make a lot of sense because for him to do that, he would have had to have gotten into it and closed the doors and driven it and then waited until like Marty came there and backed it out. But Doc doesn't seem to know Marty's there when he backs it out. It's like some weird thing he was doing to see if he could fit it in or something. But that moment's one of my all-time favorite moments just for the introduction of both the DeLorean and Dr. Emmitt Brown.
Yeah, I love that moment. It's particularly because I love that car. I wish that it was like that the company didn't fail. Like you could see more models of the DeLorean coming out. They actually have a new model that's either came out or is scheduled to come out real soon. I'm really disappointed in the design because it just looks like a car if they build the DeLorean today, what it would look like. And that's fine and all, but I would rather that they had did some kind of throwback design, so it's like a new car but it kind of have the same lines and angles as the original car did.
Oh, 1,000%. I'm right there with you on that
So
one. Yeah.
that would have been, I think that would have been key if they
Yeah,
had done
for
it that
sure, for
way.
sure. That the DeLorean's one of the characters in the movie that's like undeniable. It's as important as Doc or Marty, and is one of the things that people think of when they think of Back to the Future. Just because it seemed to be one of those things that everybody wanted to get in and drive around in the 80s, and never had that opportunity, unfortunately.
Yeah, I never had it either, but there was somebody at my high school that owned a DeLorean. I think it was one of the teachers. I never found out who it was.
So, what about you? What's one of your favorite parts of the movie?
One of my favorite parts is Crispin Glover, just when the parts where he's in it, and particularly the fact that he plays a convincing old man, right? He's so good at playing old. It's remarkable. He really owned that character. He owned that age. It's like that that slow movement, that the way he laughed. I mean, even though he laughed as an old man the same way he laughed as a young man. It's just it was like it was slowed down as an old man. He was like he moved a lot slower, so he embodied that. And then the different versions of himself as old, like old before Marty goes back into the past, and then old after Marty comes back to the future, and he's a much more successful person than before Marty had changed the time. And the difference in his demeanor, yet he's still being an old man, is he's like he did a
Yeah, he
masterful
really
job at
did
that.
embody that character fully, and yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And old George McFly, considering that he moved differently than when he played the teenage version of George, that's absolutely. I agree with that. He was a delight to see in the movie.
All right, hit me up with another favorite part.
Well, I touched on it earlier. It's probably cheating because it's part of the finale of the movie, but the DeLorean racing to hit the lightning bolt at the end at the clock tower. There's just something about that is just the way it's edited, the music, the problems. That's what you want in a movie. Is you want there to be a solution, but you want all of these obstacles in the way to keep you from getting there. And right at that moment when it's storming and the tree falls and knocks the cable out, and Doc's trying to get it up there, and Marty's trying to tell Doc that he's going to be killed on the night that he goes back to the future, or back to the 50s, and the way that they try to work together and they solve the problems, and then there's more problems and Marty can't get the car to start, and like all these things, and finally everything's in motion. Doc's coming down the cable to where the tree knocked out the other end of the cable, and Marty's racing down the street, and just the way that it all comes together with the music, the visuals, and then the lightning hits, and it's like that moment where you can breathe again because like they've done it, and Doc is there and he's like dancing a jig and he's laughing out loud because it's like that pressure is now gone, and he can just like laugh off that like all these things just happen, and it's like experiences that we have in real life that are maybe not as dramatic as that, but we have these things where we get through it and then we like, holy crap, I can't believe that we did that, or that we survived this thing. And it's shot absolutely perfectly. They recycled it for the end of Back to the Future 2 and the beginning of 3, but that moment is one of my all-time favorites because it really shows you how to get to the climax of the action of the movie, and that whole middle section is leading up towards getting him back to where he belongs, and it's just executed so well that I love that. And obviously no CGI back then or anything else. It was all practical stuff, and there's so many elements that came together to make that to me that moment is just perfection in Back to the Future.
Yeah, that is also one of my favorite parts. And I just want to add to it that you had touched on the effects. So just to add on to the end with the clock tower is that I really love the effect of the DeLorean going through time, where you see it speeding down the road, and then there's a flash and smoke, and then it's gone, and all you see is the tires, the trail of tires that's lit in flames. So the flaming tire trail that where the car would be if it stayed in the same time period. That's just an amazing effect. I've always loved that. And then I love how they characterize the when it went through time, when it got to the other side, it was covered in ice. Not right away though, but it would gradually frost over and to the point where it's too cold to touch. And I just loved it. It's like they really thoroughly thought about some of the things that could happen when an object went through time. But I really love that effect of the car going through time. That's like one of my favorite things about the movie.
You know, one of the things about that time travel sequence too is that it's restrained, because I think if you look at movies from like the 70s where they would have had sequences like that, you have the impulse to like, let's show the journey through time. And this, it was instantaneous. So it's like, you know, here's 1985, there's the sonic booms and the bright light, and then you're, you know, in that field with the scarecrow in 1955, and that's all the transition that you needed. It kept it real short, real tight, real kind of vague for how they were doing it. Whereas like the 1960s, the Time Machine, you know, you got to see this whole journey through like hundreds of thousands of years and things like that. But in this, he needs to put on the brakes so he doesn't hit that barn. And it's very quick the way that they do it. And I think that it's also, you know, it's not wasting or investing like millions of dollars in the special effects that weren't needed, because what they did was just all that was needed. And it worked in a way that maybe filmmakers today wouldn't have the restraint to actually try to pull off.
Yeah. And I think it goes towards how Doc Brown explained time travel. Like, so he was saying that, like when he was talking about Einstein, the dog, and how Einstein, the dog, I have to say that because I don't want people thinking that I'm talking about Albert Einstein. So he put his dog in the time machine and did a test run. And he said that for the dog, the travel was instantaneous. So for Marty, it was, and we were in the seat with Marty. We were in the car with Marty. So we experienced instantaneous time travel. And I thought that was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that aspect of Back to the Future. Had a lot of restraint as filmmakers not to try to come up with some, you know, unnecessary showing of how it worked. Just the explanation, like it's instantaneous, and like you say, that Einstein jumped over the 1 minute in time to arrive where he did, and all that just was really entertaining. But it is economical for as a storytelling device. And I always thought that was why that script's one of the best ever written, is because it is as economical as it is, and told the story and just kept moving it forward rather than bogging you down in things that you just didn't need.
Right. So one of my other favorite parts, I like a lot of the small details that they put in this movie. Like a lot of the details, like especially the details at the beginning of the movie, like, and the camera is just kind of like glossing over all of these details. And as an audience member, you're not really expected to take it all in. But then when he gets back to the past, a lot of the things that you saw that was just like background, it's like now in the forefront. Like luckily Marty's there to kind of explain to you these things that you saw. Like when Marty is riding around, you see the campaign vehicle for Goldie running for mayor, running for re-election. And then when Marty goes back to the past, he confronts he sees Goldie sweeping the shop, and he says, "That's right, he's going to be mayor." Right. Like, so they do a lot of that. But one of my favorite like details is that when Doc Brown is explaining his plan to get Marty back to the future, and he's built a small scale model of a section of the city or the town, and he's got the model DeLorean, and it's like, and what he says is, please excuse the crudity of this model. I'm like, he's trying to, like, the most important thing is getting the boy back to the future, and he's worried about his model work. And that was just, and it's just a little bit of insight into his personality. Like, one of the things that he was concerned about was how his model was perceived, because he worked hard on that little model that was basically just there to
for sure. Yeah, he's worried about the scale.
Right. He's worrying about the scale and everything. It was I just love that part. And he does that. I think he does that in every movie. But that's I just like that he was so concerned about that, and how, and I guess it shows how meticulous he is, how detail oriented he is, as far as his science goes, or how he pursues science.
I think that's true too. One of my favorite parts about that scene is when the wind up car goes rogue and sets some like rags in his lab on fire. It has one of my favorite Christopher Lloyd reactions in it because he sees these rags like catch fire, and he does this weird like twister mouth thing where he looks like he's a human Muppet, and that's probably why he ended up in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, because he looks like he's a human Muppet or a human cartoon, because he just has this weird reaction and it's on the screen and it's gone, and he goes and gets the extinguisher. But yeah, Doc Brown, one of the most craziest characters for his attention to detail and his relationship with Marty and everything else. It's that's a really good one. That scene too also raises a question, because in Doc's lab in 1955, he's got a saxophone mounted on a wall, and I've always wondered if he like played the saxophone or if he got it from someplace. Like, there's some unanswered questions there that, as a super fan, I would like to get the answers to, and I don't know who to ask.
Well, I guess Bob, one of the writers, that's his job now. His job is to answer questions about Back to the Future. I don't know if he's still alive. Maybe we should look up Bob Gale and see if he can answer some more of these questions.
He's
about
still alive. I tried to. I say he's still alive. He wrote a couple of years ago. He co-authored a book that's like a guide to the DeLorean that points out like all the parts and what it does. And he wrote parts about like Doc Brown's history. I don't remember anything in it about him playing the saxophone, but I know that Gale has also written a bunch of comic books that kind of give more backstory and stuff. But I also wonder too, that might not have been a direction from him or Zemeckis. It might have just been set dressing that they put there. That and the big swordfish that's in Doc's garage, and the fact that he's got like a jukebox and stuff like that. But there are these little details that make you just wonder, like, he looks like he's a fully formed human being rather than just a character. So I've just, the saxophone is one of the stupidest things that I've ever had a question about, and haven't ever had a chance to pose questions. But Bob Gale is still alive, and now I'm going to hunt him down because now I got to
know. Did you have another favorite part?
I have. I was thinking about this today because I rewatched the movie between yesterday and today. And one of the things that I realized in all the watchings here is I don't think I ever gave enough credit to Leah Thompson. Like, she's there. She's very pretty. She gives a solid performance. But I realized today how much I feel like the movie kind of hinges on her performance, because the infatuation she has for Marty, if it comes on too strong, it gets weird because of what we know. It's weird enough being that, they're mother and son, and she doesn't know that, and he's like carrying that around. But the fact that she's kind of like as restrained and is like dreamy eyed looking at him really helps to sell that movie. Like, I feel like all the performances are good, but I feel like hers was probably the trickiest of anybody's that was there. And without her understanding what this movie was and doing what she did in that role, I kind of feel like we don't have as strong as of a movie. So I kind of felt like today watching it that she was kind of the glue in a way that I never really considered her to be, because there's all these beats of her, waking up Marty after her dad hits him with the car, and wondering about like his purple underwear, and she's obviously like infatuated. His clothes are on her hope chest, which is what women used to have when they hope to get married and things like that. So she's like telegraphing these things, but there are some points where it could, a lesser actress might have made it stronger, or might have gone in kind of a different direction, but she really kept it consistent. And at that moment towards the end where, she kisses Marty and she backs away and says, kissing you is like kissing my brother, she realizes that whatever attraction that she has, that's now been killed, because nobody wants to make out with their brother. And so it kills that for her. And that really leads the way for her to, fall in love with George when he's her rescuer from Biff. And the way that after George punches out Biff, the way that she looks at him is just absolutely perfect. I think it's a way that most guys want to be looked at by like the woman in their life, or the significant other in their life. And she's just there. Like, every beat is strong, not an awful moment from her in that I've always had a huge appreciation for Leah Thompson, but in that particular viewing today, I felt like more like she was the glue that really held that 1955 story together better than it probably deserved to hold together. But yeah, I think she's sort of an unsung hero because we think about Fox, we think about Christopher Lloyd, but I think she's kind of one of the unsung heroes that helped to make that movie work as well as it did.
Yeah, and besides that, I think she was great because of the way she played the contrast between her older self and her younger self. How her older self was like saying, I wasn't that type of a girl, and I don't like that girl, and you shouldn't be chasing boys, like she would say to her daughter. But then, like as a child, she's the complete opposite. Like,
Yep.
she's undressing boys,
drinking, smoking, everything. Yep.
she's asking boys to the dance. Yeah, right. She's doing all the things. She called Marty a square because he didn't want to drink. Right.
Right. Yep.
And then she complains that Marty is talking like her mother. So she's doing all of the things.
Yeah, well, and she's also, like you say, absolutely believable as a 47-year-old woman at the beginning and end of that movie. And it seems like she's really miserable in her day-to-day life at the beginning. One of my favorite scenes with her is that she says, your dad kissed me on the dance floor, and that's how I knew I'd be with him forever. And then there's a shot of George doing that laugh at the honeymooners, and Marty and his sister Linda looking at each other like, what was she thinking? Like, and even she looks, Lorraine looks like she's reevaluating her life choices at this point. And this is why she's drinking. This is why she's heavier than she is at the end of the movie and stuff, because life is way down on her and she's just self-medicating to get through it. And that's the impression that you get. And she handled that so well. And the makeup on her for being 47 is like 100% believable. When I saw the movie, I didn't know her from anybody. So seeing her in this and then seeing like the younger version, I'm like, like blown away by the different characters that she played, because they really do feel like two different characters going from, life has dragged me down to being 17 and young and optimistic and, having the hots for this new guy that fell out of a tree outside of her house. So I give her a lot of credit. She's like I said, the glue that I think really holds that movie together.
Right. So I know that on your podcast, there's no profanity, but on this show, there's a little bit of profanity. Sometimes there's a lot. I'm only prefacing this because there's about to be some profanity, because one of my favorite part is when Marty is trying to get his father in the past, George, to basically act like he's going to attack Lorraine. He's going to attack Marty's mother before it's Marty's mother. And no, actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm getting the plan wrong. Marty is supposed to attack Lorraine. And then George is supposed to come in and save the day. He's supposed to, get Marty, slap him in the face. And then he's supposed to say, hey, like, hey, damn you,
get
or
your
hey,
damn hands off
or something
of her.
like that. Get your hands off my woman. And then he says, do you really think I ought to swear?
Right.
Right. Get your damn hands off my woman. And he says, do you really think I ought to swear? And Marty says, yes, goddammit. Yes, goddammit, George, swear.
Yep. Yeah.
I love that part, because it's like he's really trying. It's like he's showing his frustration with his father. Like, he kind of likes his father, but his father is like, if you don't do this, I am not going to exist anymore. So you need to do this.
Yeah.
So
that's
I love
really
that
great.
part.
It's a good moment for those two, and it really shows that Marty can feel that ticking clock going by, and that he's not sure that George is going to be up to this. So he's just like, trying to put the pressure on him to do what needs to be done, or like you say, he's over, he's history. So yeah, no, absolutely, that's a great moment.
All right, I think we're down to the last favorite part. To tell you the truth, and all the excitement, I've lost count.
Is it my moment, or is it one from you? Because I feel like I've kind of chimed in on your moments a lot through this as well. So I don't know if it was your moment or my moment to go next.
No, you can go ahead.
I can go ahead. I think one of the fun moments in the movie is after all the stress is over and Marty gets dropped off at his home and Doc finally gets to use his time machine to go into the future. Marty goes in, crashes out, wakes up the next day, and wakes up in his bedroom like it was just all some sort of all a dream. And he comes out and enters in. It's like Dorothy opening that door in The Wizard of Oz, where it's been black and white, and now it's color that's come through. Where he realizes that the home he came back to is not the home that he left, and so there's all these changes. It's that shock um of exploring, like, okay, well, why are Dave and Linda dressed like they are? Because Dave works at Burger King, and at last he knew. And Linda's different, and they're talking about her boyfriends and having this like elaborate breakfast. And then George and Lorraine come in, and they're completely changed, and that a lot has happened. Apparently he's a successful author but lives in the same house that he did before when he was a lot less successful, so there's some problems with that. But for the most part, finding those little changes that happen because of what Marty did in the past and George's confidence and all that, it's real fun to discover that. And then you have that downbeat of Marty connecting with Jennifer, and then Doc coming saying, you have to come with me because it's about your kids, and they're off on another adventure. And what I loved about that as a kid is that they go into the future, they're on another adventure, and it was black screen, and that was it. And when it came out on home video, they put the to be continued on there, but there was never the intention of making a sequel to it. So all those little moments, all the things with Jennifer getting into the car, going off into some unknown future, that just felt like what you want from a movie where you want to see what that next adventure is. You want to know where they go. You want to be able to follow them, and of this discovery of this like alternate present for Marty. And I've always appreciated that. I also realized today that there's a remnant of a cut scene. Also, when Marty comes out of his room, he's holding an envelope. Originally, there was a scene where Marty was going to send off a tape to a record company. He talks with Jennifer at the beginning of the movie about it, but he's afraid of rejection. In a draft of the script, there was a scene, and bring my video camera and meet me at the mall. So when Marty gets back to 1985 at the end, he picks up that cassette and basically says like, what the hell, or whatever, wants to give it a try, puts it in the envelope, and is going to mail that out, hopefully to be successful with his music career. But they cut that out. But I realized today that the envelope that he was taking out was still in his hand. So I was happy that there was at least some evidence of that. But that's also a change in Marty, where he's got this newfound confidence to pursue what he wanted to, because George pursued what he wanted to and became the writer and more confident and all that kind of stuff. But that ending, that ending sequence of, this is new, this is Doc coming and going off to a new adventure, I think, again, is how you want a movie to end. Whether there's a sequel or not, it leaves you wanting more in a very organic way, in a very fun way. And, it makes you wonder what else in that universe has changed for Marty or his family or in general around the town.
That's one of the best endings to a movie that there ever were. It's just a great way how because it subverted expectations, the audiences and Marty, we're all expecting him to return to the exact same house in the exact same state that he left it in, because that's where he was working towards. That was the goal. The goal was to make sure that his parents got together and that his brother and sister stayed alive. That was the goal. But then it's like he got a bonus at the end of the movie. It's like now his life is actually better than it was when he left. So that was pretty awesome, the way that movie ended, and the way it was presented as well. Also, I mentioned that he's a successful author, but he's living in the same house. I'm not sure if he was successful yet, because the shipment of books that he got was his first novel.
The first, right.
So
right,
I'm guessing that he's probably at the same. I'm guessing that he's at the same house that he was, because he's working at the same job. But now he's not Biff's subordinate. Now he probably has Biff's job, and Biff isn't working at the job. He's obviously a detailer for the family or something. He works for the McFlys. He works for them as a handyman, right? He's not working at the office, because now, like George McFly is is not doing his work for him. Now he has to do his own work, and he's not as smart as, or he can't present himself as being as smart as he could because nobody's doing his homework for him. Because I imagine that as soon as McFly hit him, that was done. The homework was done, right? He's not doing the homework no more. So now the best that he can hope for is being a handyman.
Yep.
So yeah, that's all great. Let me move into one of my favorite parts. The last one is going to be the dance. So this is when I think his name was Chuck Berry or Marvin Berry. I can't remember his name. Is it Berry?
It was Marvin Berry. Marvin Berry was there.
Right, Marvin Berry. So he says he wants to make something that really cooks, and then Marty gets on he gets on the guitar. He gives them like the basics of what the song is going to be, and then he goes into his version of Johnny Be Good, and he's like really tearing it up, and the kids are loving it, and they're all dancing, and it's great. It's great. And then he kind of goes off the rails. The band actually stops playing and just starts looking at him. The kids, they just stop and they're just staring, and he's like going off on his guitar, and it's just pretty awesome the way that turned out. I love that part. So that's the last of my favorite parts. Obviously, I left a bunch of stuff out.
Yeah, for sure. For me, that whole movie is just
yeah. The whole movie is great. So that's it for our favorite parts. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you've had some favorite parts of this movie. So if you want to let us know what you loved about Back to the Future, you know where to write us. I will have contact information at the end of the episode. But right now, we're going to go and talk about the trivia. All right, Christopher, I've scoured the den that scoured the internets, and I landed on IMDb because that's where I usually go. It's basically a one-stop shop for trivia. So I stopped there. I scoured the IMDb to find some of the most interesting trivia that I liked about Back to the Future. And a lot of the trivia that we're going to cover is just stuff that's legend, because this movie is packed full of trivia. So I want you to start us off with probably the most famous piece of trivia about Back to the Future.
All right. Well, Michael J. Fox had always been the first choice to play Marty, but he was unavailable due to scheduling conflicts with his work on the TV show Family Ties. As Family Ties co-star Meredith Baxter was pregnant at the time, Fox was carrying a lot more of the show than usual. The show's producer, Gary David Goldberg, simply couldn't afford to let Fox go. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale then cast Eric Stoltz as Marty based on his performance in the movie Mask. After 6 weeks of filming, Zemeckis and Gale felt that Stoltz wasn't right for the part, and Stoltz agreed. By this stage, Baxter was fully back on the show, and Goldberg agreed to let Fox go off to make the film. Fox worked out a schedule to fulfill his commitment to both projects. Every day after production, he drove straight to the movie set after taping on Family Ties finished and averaged about 5 or 6 hours of sleep. The bulk of the production was filmed from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., with the daylight scenes filmed on weekends. Reshooting Stoltz's scene added $3 million to the budget. Stoltz would later play the title character in The Fly 2, where his character was Martin. So he went from Marty McFly to Martin the Fly.
I did not know that last part.
I didn't either. I've never seen The Fly 2, but it's kind of funny.
Yeah. And I've heard some other things about Eric Stoltz. We're going to talk a little bit more about him later on in the trivia. But I like when you see the outtakes are out there with his scenes in it. You can see, this guy doesn't know what movie he's in. It's like he's shooting a different movie than what they're trying to film. It's like, Eric, this is a comedy. Let's do the comedy thing.
Right. Yeah, had a much different take on Marty McFly. The still pictures kind of say it all that I've seen, and I know that in some other timeline out there in the multiverse somewhere that got made, and it might be a classic or it might not. But I'm glad that we got Michael J. Fox because he really did something with that character. He made it iconic, and it's in a way that I don't think Stoltz would have lived up to.
Yeah, I agree on that one. So writers Gale and Zemeckis actually received a fan letter from John DeLorean after the film's release, thanking him for immortalizing his car.
In 2010, during a cast reunion, Michael J. Fox said that strangers still call him McFly. Fox said that the most remarkable instance was when he was in a remote jungle in the South Asian country Bhutan, located between China and India in the eastern Himalayas. A group of Buddhist monks passed him, and one of them looked at Fox and said, "Marty McFly." These Buddhist monks pass you by, and I'm sure their robes and what they do, and to have made a pop cultural reference like that, that shows that you've really achieved something as an iconic character.
Yeah, you definitely penetrated the culture of the world. It's like now you're not just American culture, you're world culture now.
It reminds me of the story of when the Dalai Lama and some of his followers were on the set of Star Trek: The Next Generation. They all gravitated towards the Brent Spiner's character of Data, and somewhere out there, there's a picture of Brent Spiner as Data posing next to the Dalai Lama, surrounded by by his monks, and that's a pretty surreal picture too, because it's like it's a weird, it's like two things that don't really go together, but happen. So it kind of reminds me, that moment with Michael J. Fox reminds me of that moment with Brent Spiner.
So up next, Tom Wilson almost had his collarbone broken in a scene where Marty and Biff were about to fight in the cafeteria as Eric Stoltz roughed up Tom for real. Take after take, despite repeated requests from Tom to tone it down, the aggression. Tom later said that he was about to return the favor during filming of the car park scene outside of the dance, but Eric was fired before that confrontation could take place. So Eric he's like he was going too hard.
Man. Eric Stoltz, he was a method actor. He only wanted to be called Marty while on the set. If you said, "Hey, Eric," he wouldn't respond. You had to call him by his character name for him to know that you were talking to him. And he took what he did as the craft very, very seriously. So, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, to the annoyance of the other actors that are like, "Hey, it's a job. Let's just get it done. Let's not do this." And yeah, Eric took it way too seriously from all the behind the scenes stuff I've ever heard.
I actually, Christopher Lloyd didn't know Eric's name. He thought the man's name was actually Marty.
Jeez. Well, I guess he gets a gold star for his commitment, but that's something else. That's some other level of commitment. Did you know that that there's a brief scene where Eric Stoltz is actually still in the final movie?
I've heard about that, but I don't remember what scene that is.
So it's the scene where George is trying to ask out Lorraine in the cafe, and Biff comes in and disrupts that, and Marty like trips Biff and gets the attention on him and away from George, and it's when Biff and Marty are like having a confrontation there, and Marty says, "Hey Biff, what's that?" And Biff looks away. The way that was shot, there's a fist that goes after Biff at that point, and that fist is apparently Eric Stoltz still in the movie. Tom Wilson said that he remembers when he shot that with Stoltz, and he remembers when they shot it with Fox, and that he doesn't remember them shooting the reverse of it, where it was over Michael J. Fox's shoulder, where that would have happened. So he thinks that the fist that enters the scene for like a whole second and a half is probably still Eric Stoltz in the movie. With the reshoots that they had to do, if they didn't have to reshoot it, they tried not to. So that's probably one of those things where they're like, you know what, leave it in. Nobody will know. This will never be on, digital or DVD, and nobody will ever talk about this in the next 40 years. So just leave it in. It'll be fine. Nobody will ever know.
Right. And that they did. Go ahead and get the next one.
When this movie was previewed for a test audience, Industrial Light and Magic had not completed the final DeLorean in-flight shot, and the last several minutes of the movie were previewed in black and white. It didn't matter, as the audience roared in approval for the final scene anyway, because they knew a hit when they saw it.
Yeah, that was they got the raw footage. Like sometimes you'll see either in a deleted scene, or sometimes somebody get like a what do you call it? A bootleg copy of a movie before it's ready for release, and you'll see the unfinished special effects. And if it's a good movie, people won't care. They'll know and understand that the effects are rough. And so yeah, that's when you get the audience to cheer anyway, you got a hit on your hands.
Right, for sure. That's a testament to that they were following along during the rest of the movie, that they understood it with the work print that they had. It's with the audience roaring and cheering for the movie at the end. It just shows you that they were along for the ride, and like it said, it didn't matter that it was the work print for the movie. They got it, they understood it, and probably like me wanted more. And stuff, and it's a testament to the movie that it came out as well as it did, and even in that form could be appreciated. So I always thought that was pretty cool.
Universal Pictures. Oh, so I'm already starting this off wrong. Hold on, let me readjust my tone. Universal Pictures head Sid Sheinberg did not like the title Back to the Future, insisting that nobody would see a movie with future, quote unquote, in the title. In a memo to Robert Zemeckis, he said that the title should be changed to Spaceman from Pluto, tying it with the Marty as an alien joke in the film, and also suggested further changes like replacing the I'm Darth Vader from the planet Vulcan line with I am a spaceman from Pluto. Sheinberg was persuaded to change his mind by a response memo from Steven Spielberg, which thanked him for sending a wonderful joke memo that everyone got a kick out of. Steinberg, too proud to admit that he was serious, gave in to letting the film retain its title. So what I thought that was remarkable is Steven Spielberg pulling off a totally boss move. He was like, yeah, you're joking, right?
Yeah, I couldn't imagine that this would carry the same box office if in the summer of 1985, Spaceman from Pluto was like in theaters. That the title alone would probably have repulsed people, because Back to the Future, it's like, what the hell does that mean? It's almost asking you to like go and see it to figure out the riddle of Back to the Future. But Spaceman from Pluto just sounds like not even a B movie. That sounds like a C movie that should have come out in the 50s for sure. And yeah, that bit of trivia is just really does show you how awesome Spielberg was and knew how to handle those kind of people.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, even if you didn't know like what Back to the Future was, all you had to do was watch the trailer. The trailer would explain everything. And then I think in the trailer, they say this line, Back to the Future, like, we have to get you back to the future. So like, once you see the trailer, you know what's at stake and what the movie is about. And what I really enjoy about it is that it's such an awesome sounding title, right? It flows off the tongue. It rhymes almost. There's something about that's great.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure. It's an iconic title. It's not a title like any other. It's not some run of the mill thing. It's not named after the main character. It's not really trying to be artsy fartsy. The whole thing about Back to the Future, the film, the title, everything is that it wants to be functional and entertain you. And just the phrase "Back to the Future," just, I don't know. It's just something kind of magical about that hasn't really been captured in other movies since. So yeah, it's definitely light years away from a Spaceman from Pluto.
Right, absolutely.
All right. Doc's distinctive hunched over demeanor developed when the filmmakers realized the extreme difference in height between Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox. Fox is 5'4.5" tall, while Lloyd is a towering 6'1". To compensate for the height difference, director Zemeckis used specific blocking where the two stood far apart at different camera depths. For close-ups, Lloyd would have to hunch over to appear in frame with Fox. The same approach was used in the sequels. I also noticed, to go along with that, that there's in each of the movies that there's a scene where Doc is explaining something to Marty, and they're usually side by side, but then Doc will race off to do something and Marty will then race back with him, and then Doc will race to the foreground. And they did it notably in Back to the Future 2, but they also did it when Doc was testing the DeLorean in the original Back to the Future, and they do it in the third one as well, where they just kind of keep trading places. So you have, a good rule of film storytelling is to always have motion happening in the scene. But because of their height difference, I think that's why they would go back and forth like that as well, so that, they kept them in motion. They kind of kept them together but apart, and had these really manic, weird, energy driven scenes to keep the exposition going. Is notoriously short in Hollywood, and Christopher Lloyd, pretty tall for a guy as well. And if you have them back side by side, it's going to be really noticeable. So that's really a testament to Zemeckis wanting to not so much hide it, but not to really want to highlight it either.
Yeah. And I also, it seems to have presented some actual technical issues that they needed to resolve. And I never even realized that, like, the Doc was hunched over like that. I just took it for granted that they were both in the scene together. They were acting, and I never thought about the mechanics of two people talking and having to stay in frame or anything like that. I hadn't thought about that, but it's like, when you put it in black and white like that, when you write it down, it's like, oh, I can see how this could be a problem.
Well, I think that's a testament to Zemeckis as well, is that he realized the problem, and he figured out the solutions, so that when you saw it, you weren't really questioning any of that, or it wasn't drawing attention away from the story or the characters. And he's a director that realized he might have a problem of not being able to do side by side shots, and so figured out a way to be more creative and to keep it going. And that's one of the cool things about the movie, is that, there's no real still moments in it. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So up next, we have Huey Lewis was asked by Zemeckis and Gale to write a song for the film. However, the two Bobs were not thrilled with the first song Huey brought back to them. After explaining what they were hoping for, Huey came back with The Power of Love. He was then told they needed one more song. And so, upon viewing a cut of the film, Huey got inspiration for Back in Time. Both of those are bangers. He did an amazing job on the soundtrack for this movie. Just incredible work by Huey Lewis.
Oh, for sure. And it's that 80s pop culture sound in those songs. It's a legitimate rock band doing it. It's not, something that was written by committee or anything like that. And very memorable in there. Also too, having Back in Time play over the end credits. The last thing that you see is the DeLorean coming at you and disappearing. It cuts to black, the credits roll, Back in Time comes up, and it references Marty and Doc in it and stuff. And yeah, it's the way that you want to go out of a movie theater excited that you saw this thing, rather than some slow piece of the score playing over the end that just kind of makes you feel like you've gone on some epic journey and now you need to go take a nap. So yeah, great work from Huey Lewis, and a good call to put those in. All right. Speaking of music, Mark was perhaps best known as the lead singer of popular 80s band Jack Mack and the Heart Attack, which, to be fair, as much as I love Back to the Future, I knew that Fox wasn't singing his own, but I've never heard Jack Mack and the Heart Attack. So that makes me curious to go and check him out as well and see what kind of music they did, because not familiar with that as all. Have you ever heard of that band?
Never heard of it. And what I didn't think to do, what I should have done, was look him up, see if he was on Spotify or something. But I never even thought about it. I was like, oh, that's just a band that I've never heard of. I figured somebody may have heard of him. I thought maybe you might have heard of him, but nope, nobody's heard of him.
Nope. You know what? I haven't heard of them, but you know what? In the future will probably be a segment at break time, because I can definitely explore something like that. So if I do, I'll tag you in that. So for sure.
Absolutely. Sounds like a plan. So our last bit of trivia that we have is in April 2020, Gail finally decided to explain a plot hole question about why Marty's parents didn't remember him as a high school kid who got them together. Now, here's the funny thing about this. I have always posited this. I've always thought that the reason that they didn't know about Marty or they didn't remember Marty is what I'm about to read. And the funny thing about it is like, why I didn't understand why people didn't get this or why people couldn't figure this out for themselves. But anyway, he told the Hollywood Reporter, quote, you know what? I'm going to speak in a different accent so that you know I'm speaking as Gail. I'm going to speak with a country accent. Now, here's the thing. I don't know if Gail is from the country, but I'm switching accents so that you know it's him. So when he spoke to the Hollywood Reporter, he said, "Bear in mind that George and Lorraine only knew Marty / Calvin for 8 days when they were 17, and they did not even see him every one of those 8 days. So many years later, they still might remember that interesting kid who got them together on their first date." He continued, "But I would ask anyone to think back on their own high school days and ask themselves how well they remember a kid who might have been at their school for even a semester. Or someone you went out with just one time. If you had no photo reference after 25 years, you'd probably have just a hazy recollection. So Lorraine and George might think it was funny that once they actually met someone named Calvin Klein, and even if they thought their son at age 17 or 16 had some resemblance to him, it wouldn't be a big deal. Now, I'd bet most of us could look through our high school yearbooks and find photos of our teenage classmates that bear some resemblance to our children." And so that's me quoting Bob Gale in a country accent. And I've always said this. I would always type this on Twitter when people ask about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely true. Because if we were to think back to the people that all those people, I'm sure their faces changed with the mists of time, and yeah, it's completely plausible that they wouldn't remember, no matter how much of an impact that Marty might have made on Lorraine in 1955. She fell for George and just sort of wiped him out of her memory. And as the years went by, I'm sure that his face just got hazier and hazier, like it's for all of us. So, that's not a surprise.
Especially after seeing him only a couple of times, really. So yeah, there are people that whose faces that if I've only seen them one time 30 years ago, there's no way I'm going to remember them.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, and it's funny because Marty and Lorraine end it. Marty goes off and Lorraine turns to George and says, "Marty, such a nice name." Yeah, it was so nice that they named their youngest child, the third born, Marty, because maybe they totally forgot that there was a Marty. And when Marty was born, was like, "Oh, this should be our Marty." We already had Dave. He could have been Marty, but nope. They decided to go with the final child that they have to be named after this, apparently now named after this person that got him together all those years ago. So maybe Marty Calvin Klein wasn't as important to Lorraine as she might have thought or we thought for her. But I always thought it was funny that she's like, such a nice name, but gave it to their third class born.
Right.
So not that great of a name.
Right. Probably because they both forgot it. And then they probably finally remembered, oh, and remember, didn't we know somebody named Marty? Or maybe they weren't even conscious of it. Maybe it just kind of spontaneously popped in maybe George's head. And he was thinking Marty would be a good name, but not knowing or remembering why Marty was so important to his life as a teenager.
Very true. Very true. There's a fan theory going around that maybe because Lorraine and George met in 1955, in the original timeline, that maybe their son Marty was named after the movie Marty that was the Best Picture Oscar winner with Ernest Borgnine in it in 1955. So people have kind of like put those two thoughts together, like maybe it was originally that, but I'm sure only Bob Gale knows for sure. I think he just picked the name at random, to be honest, because it was just a name. So, but yeah, the whole naming thing that people say, when they remember, it's like no. You think back to 2 weeks ago. I bet you can't remember the face of somebody that you met in passing for just a few minutes.
That's absolutely correct. So that was the last of the trivia, and up next we're going to examine what the critics thought. All right, the critics gave it a 93%. The audience score was 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. On IMDb reviews, it's at 8.5 out of 10. That is extraordinarily high for IMDb. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. Tell us what the first couple of critics thought.
Well, Eleanor O'Sullivan of the Ashbury Park Press in New Jersey said Back to the Future it has all the substance of junk food and is as harmless as your average TV show. So obviously not very appreciated by the Ashbury Park Press.
No.
On the other side of the world, Susie Eisenhuth of the Sun Herald in Australia said, I know it sounds a bit on the Disney-esque side, but like the hero's DeLorean, it's light years away from all of that. The gags, which are plentiful, are served up with a nice wry touch, and the performances all around are as zesty as Zemeckis' own. So it seemed like she was a reviewer that seemed to have some appreciation for it. So at least it wasn't totally lost on some of the viewers that saw it, the adults. I'm sure the kids had much different things to say than the adults did.
Also, just to reiterate, it has a 93% score and at 8.5 on IMDb. So I would say that someone like Eleanor is in a very tiny minority of people who had something bad to say about Back to the Future. Not even that whether they liked it or not, just not anything nice to say. Because the funny thing about it is that it's not like she's wrong. It's not like Back to the Future has like hard hitting issues. It's not covering something that's like it's not hard journalism. Is it junk food? I mean, like you could do that, but it did have some important messages, like sticking up for yourself. Following your dreams, like not being afraid to go out and put yourself out there. Like if you're a creative person, like one of the things in one of the scenes, Marty finds his father, like writing a book, like writing a story in a notebook, but George is afraid to share it with people. Just like Marty in his own time was afraid to share his tape with people, or like a record company or whoever he was going to share the tape, whatever person he was going to share the tape. See, now language is hard. Whoever he was going to give the tape to get his music out there, he was afraid to do it. So so it had themes of like just putting your stuff out there and seeing what happens. And this reviewer, like she didn't see any of that. She just called the movie junk food because I don't know. She didn't see it. It didn't give anything of value to her, but she's definitely in a minority. I started to stutter, but I got through it.
You figure with the reviewers too, you have, if you're a professional reviewer, you go to all the movies, you see them all, you're trying to just come up with, how you felt about it on this like surface gut level sort of thing. And you're not thinking, oh, I'm going to go see this and it's the next classic or anything like that. So when your job is to really go through and review it and say something about it one way or the other, it sort of becomes this like machine kind of thing of just like, it's an assembly line of insults or praise or whatever that you're going to give it. But I'm sure back in 1985, this reviewer, who I'm sure was well into being an adult and probably lost that sense of wonder, just viewed Back to the Future as another movie for teenagers, and for the kids. And it's just like she says, it's no substance, it's junk food, and it's hollow and empty calories and all that kind of stuff. But I think the reason why Back to the Future endures isn't because of the adults at the time, but because of the kids who saw it and like took it for what it was and ran with it, and dreamed about being in the DeLorean or being able to travel through time or having a friend like Doc Brown and those sort of things. And so the fact that this reviewer just sort of like put this label on there, she probably was happy with this review, thinking that she was really clever for how she worded this, and then moved on to whatever the next movie was at that time that she was going to go and review, so it's just another movie, just another thing to get through. And I probably didn't give it much thought afterwards either.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail with the hammer. So our next couple of reviewers, we have Rex Reed from the New York Post wrote, "Lost in confusion, director Robert Zemeckis and co-script writer Bob Gale don't know how to end the far-out fantasy they've created. And the smell of an equally silly sequel permeates the air like a gas tank or a gas leak." So that's kind of funny because they did kind of make it look like there was going to be a sequel, and then they kind of hammered the point at the as you said, when the video cassette came out and they put "to be continued." So but the thing about it is that
Yep.
I have a difference of opinion.
Yep.
I'm thinking this is like one of the best endings ever written. So we're just going to have to agree to disagree on that one.
What the funny thing about Rex Reed is he had a small cameo in Superman the movie, the Christopher Reeve 1978 movie. He sees Clark and Lois in passing and makes some sort of comment. Rex Reed, though, notoriously hard on popcorn movies. He was the reviewer that wanted the substance and probably was like, Lawrence of Arabia was the greatest movie ever made, and wanted movies like that as opposed to the popcorn movies that were more fun and were interesting. And what I love about this quote is that he says that an equally silly sequel permeates the air like a gas leak, meaning that, oh yeah, for sure from the beginning that they knew that there was going to be a second one. And that in all the years after that movie came out, seeing interviews with Zemeckis or Bob Gale saying that they had no idea that it was going to be successful. They had no ideas for a sequel, but if they were going to make one, they wouldn't have put the girlfriend in the car. And so the fact that Rex Reed thought, oh, there's a plan up at the beginning, like he was thinking, oh, this is just going to be the Back to the Future franchise, like we assume now with most movies coming out. That was very forward thinking on his part, but wrong, because when they went to go write the sequel, they're like, how do we deal with Jennifer Parker being in the car? Because we don't want her on this adventure. So we'll just sedate her and keep her asleep. But it's just funny how Rex Reed thought that he knew what was going on when he was proven to be clueless in the years after. So I love that review just for how wrong it really is.
Right. I didn't suspect that there would be a sequel either. And I think mainly because a lot of movies that they kind of put out, they never really expect them to be sequels. Like, so when Jaws was made, they didn't think they were going to make another Jaws. Or when Star Wars was made, they had no idea that there would be another Star Wars, or that movie would even be successful. There a lot of the movies in the 80s, if they had sequel, it was only because the first movie was madly successful. The only movie that I know about that where they made the movie and the sequel simultaneously was Superman, along with Superman 2. And that was like a bold move, right? Because they were like, I guess because Superman is such a big character, that's the risk that they were willing to take with that character. And I guess they liked the script and the story and everything that goes along with it. And they liked the director. So they gave him the opportunity to do that. But very rarely back in those times did they ever have a single movie come out thinking that was going to be a franchise.
Absolutely. There were so many movies in the 80s that I've talked to a lot of people about the 80s because that's just what I do. But there's a lot of people that are like, oh, it's too bad that there was never a Goonies 2 back in the 80s, or even that Eddie Murphy's The Golden Child wasn't like an Indiana to the day. It would be great if there were sequels to like stuff like that or Howard the Duck or whatever. But the way that those movies ended and were just a one and done, that was the intention for it. And I like that because they weren't holding back on the ideas for the first one. I had this idea that, what if Back to the Future, what if they're like, you know what, let's do this first movie where it's about Doc and Marty and it leads up to the creation of the time machine, and then the second one, Marty goes back in time accidentally and has to change this, and then the third one is whatever. If you're thinking about the pieces that you want to hold back from that first one, then you're really doing a disservice to that first movie. George Lucas, you mentioned, he had some inkling that he wanted to make more Star Warses, but what he did is he took every idea that he had and stuck it in that one, hoping it would be successful and buy him that opportunity to then advance the story after that. And that's what I feel Back to the Future did as well. They threw it all in this one, hoped it would be successful, hoped that the studio would make their money back. As filmmakers, Zemeckis and Gale hoped that they would, continue working and be successful in some way. And so they did what they did with no intention at all of a sequel. And I like those kind of movies because when it leaves you wanting more and you wish that they had made that sequel, but they just never got to do it for whatever reason, it sort of becomes the stuff of your imagination or the stuff of legends of wanting that, but never being able to get it. So if there had been no Back to the Future 2 or 3, I think one, that'd be a disservice to the history of movie trilogies, but I think it would leave us, wondering like, well, what happened to Doc and Marty? Where did they go? What was that 2015 like, that they went to? And the sequel fills in the blanks, and it's not always what we want, or it's not always what we're expecting, but it's what we're given. And sometimes what we're given, it sort of diminishes the original if it's just not done well. The intellectual property, banking on the name. So the whole sequel thing has always been funny to me because, not everybody got a sequel in the 80s. And it seems like everything that comes out now gets a sequel, or it's a reboot, or it's a retread of stuff from the 80s that we probably don't need. And so that's my diatribe.
So yeah, right you are. And I don't mind the sequels so much. Well, let me say it this way. I don't mind, remakes so much, because I recognize that most of the time they're not for me. They're for the next generation. I'll let the kids enjoy those. So the final review we have is right. The final review we have is Michael D. Reed. He writes for Victoria Times Colonist. That's BC, Canada. And he wrote, just a joyously whimsical, ingeniously devised, well-written time travel comedy that anyone from 5 to 95 should find splendidly entertaining. Now, I read that all wrong, but you understood what I was saying. That he says that this was a good movie. That's what he says. So, but yeah, that was
that guy got it for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah,
he knew it was a popcorn movie. He knew it was a good time. He knew that there was some fun moments, some eye-popping moments, and some things that we'd be talking about years later. It's a good review. And he's right. From 5 to 95 should find it entertaining. And that's what sold that movie. That's why it's as good as it is, or why Ghostbusters or some of the other stuff from that same time was good, is because it entertained. And if you got it, you got it. And if you didn't, you should go see something else.
Absolutely. So finally, Back to the Future is, as of this recording, available on streaming. That's it for today. In a fortnight, we'll be back with another exciting movie from yesteryear. It's another comedic blast from the past, and it'll be interesting how it translates today with our very special guest, Successful Toy from the Successful Toy podcast on YouTube. Please join us for Police Academy. You can follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at Backlick Cinema. Don't forget that you can contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions at fanmail@backlickcinema.com. Christopher, do you have any additional plugs?
Well, my podcast comes out every other Saturday, and on Wednesdays and the Saturdays when I don't have episodes of the Saturday morning podcast, I do have these brief little micro podcasts called Break Time, where we look at one single thing from pop culture from the 80s, the 90s, give or take. I know coming out relatively soon, we should have a look at the video game Choplifter, as well as a visit to the malls of the 80s going into B. Dalton.
Oh, I have never heard of that video game.
Choplifter? Well, stay tuned because the Wednesday after this comes out, I'll tell you all about it.
Awesome. So one last time, if you like the show, then please help us grow by spreading the word about Backlick Cinema, the podcast. Believe me, it matters. And I know you've enjoyed our guest, Christopher J., so please listen to the Saturday Morning Podcast. I've been Zoe Richardson. Be safe. Share a movie from yesteryear with your family, hug your loved ones, and if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.